The rotors of my Black Hawk helicopter sliced through the crisp morning air as I completed my final maintenance check. The familiar scent of aviation fuel and metal hung in the hangar, a smell that usually brought comfort, but today felt different, heavier somehow. My name is Captain Ryan Turner, though most people know me as Hawk, and after 15 years of flying military aircraft, I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. The memories of that night in Montana still haunt me. I feel compelled to share what happened, not just for my own sanity, but as a warning. There are things out there, ancient and terrible things that were never meant to be disturbed. We learned that the hard way. It started 3 weeks ago. I was doing my usual pre-flight checks, my hands moving automatically over the control panel. I knew better than my own reflection. The dark circles under my eyes reflected in the glass cockpit display, a testament to another sleepless night haunted by memories of the car accident that took my wife and daughter 3 years ago. The empty house I returned to each night felt more like a tomb than a home, which was probably why I spent so much time in the hangar, finding solace in the mechanical precision of helicopter maintenance. The call came at 3 a.m., not unusual in our line of work, but something about the urgency in the dispatcher's voice set me on edge. Within minutes, my entire squadron was assembled in the briefing room. I looked around at the faces I'd come to trust with my life. Lieutenant Jennifer Matthews, call sign Jenna, our weapons officer, her sharp eyes already analyzing the situation. Sergeant Marcus Harris, mace to his friends, stood in his usual spot by the door, his massive frame casting a shadow over the entrance. Despite his intimidating size, I'd never met anyone more loyal or dependable. Specialist Ethan Moore, known as Ghost for his ability to appear and disappear at will, was already setting up his tech equipment. The kid was a genius with anything electronic, though his curiosity sometimes got the better of him. Our newest addition, Private First Class Isabella Velez, sat straight-backed in her chair, medical kit already prepared. Fresh out of training, Izzy had something to prove, but her skills as a combat medic had already saved lives during our last deployment. Colonel Matthew Graves entered the room, his face grim. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as he began the briefing. "We've got a situation in Montana," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and something else, something I couldn't quite identify at the time, but later recognized as fear. He pulled up satellite imagery of a remote area in the Montana wilderness. "This is Project Citadel, a deep underground research facility. At 0100 hours, we lost all contact with the installation. Seismic sensors in the area have been going crazy, and local ranchers have reported strange lights and sounds." Ghost raised his hand. "What kind of research facility are we talking about, sir?" The colonel's jaw tightened. "That's need-to-know specialist. Your mission is simple. Fly out, investigate the situation, and report back. No unnecessary risks, no heroics." I knew Graves well enough to know when he was holding something back. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine, the slight tremor in his usually steady hands as he pointed to the facility's location on the map. But orders were orders, and within an hour, we were airborne. The flight to Montana was tense. Jenna kept checking and rechecking her weapons systems, a habit she'd developed after losing her brother in Afghanistan. Mace was unusually quiet, his normal dark humor absent. Even Ghost's endless stream of tech chatter had dried up. As we approached the coordinates, our instruments began acting strangely. The GPS flickered, compass readings jumped erratically, and our radio crackled with static that seemed to form patterns just on the edge of comprehension. Below us, the Montana wilderness stretched out like a dark canvas, the pre-dawn light casting long shadows across the landscape. The facility came into view, built into the side of a mountain like an open wound in the earth. A few lights still flickered in the windows, but something about the scene felt wrong. The air itself seemed to thicken as we descended, and the usual whump of the rotors sounded muffled, as if we were flying through water instead of air. I set the Black Hawk down in a clearing near the main entrance. The moment the skids touched the ground, an unnatural silence fell over the area. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. Just an oppressive stillness that pressed against our eardrums like a physical force. Izzy was the first to notice the dead animals. They lay scattered around the perimeter of the facility, small mammals and birds frozen in positions of desperate flight. Their bodies showed no signs of injury or decay, as if they'd simply stopped living mid-stride. "This isn't right," Mace muttered, his hand tightening on his weapon. Something spooked these creatures bad enough to kill them. Jenna moved forward, her training taking over as she secured the perimeter. "The entrance is clear, but look at these frost patterns." She pointed to strange, swirling designs on the ground, despite the warm summer air. Colonel Graves' voice crackled over our comms from the command center. "Team, proceed inside. Remember, this is just a recon mission. If you encounter any facility personnel, they have priority for evacuation." As we approached the heavy steel doors of Project Citadel, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by anything human, but by something ancient and patient, something that had been waiting a very long time for visitors. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, releasing a blast of stale, cold air that carried a metallic tang and something else. Something that made the primitive part of my brain scream in warning. As we stepped into the darkness, none of us realized we were walking into a nightmare that would change us forever, and that some of us wouldn't be walking out at all. The facility's corridors stretched before us like the throat of some massive beast. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing walls of polished steel that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The air grew colder with each step, and our breath came out in visible puffs despite the environmental systems that should have maintained a constant temperature. Ghost moved ahead, his tablet displaying a schematic of the facility he'd managed to download. "Main research lab should be 2 levels down," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm picking up some strange power fluctuations. The backup generators are running, but they're drawing way more power than they should be." Jenna kept her weapon at the ready, her eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "Anyone else notice there's no blood? No signs of a struggle? If something happened here, where is everyone?" She was right. The facility appeared pristine, almost too clean. Papers sat neatly stacked on desks. Coffee cups stood half full, their contents frozen solid. Computer screens flickered with screensavers, showing the same image over and over. Project Citadel's logo, a stylized shield wrapped around what looked like a mountain. We found the security station next to a massive blast door. Ghost immediately went to work on the computers while the rest of us secured the area. The monitors sprang to life under his touch, showing feeds from various parts of the facility. "Got something," he called out. "Security footage from last night. You need to see this." The timestamp on the video showed 11:47 p.m. A group of scientists huddled around something in one of the lower labs. The camera angle couldn't show what they were examining, but their body language screamed excitement. Then one of them stepped back, pointing at something off-screen. The others turned, and their excitement transformed into terror. The video cut to static. "Play the next one," I ordered. The next clip showed a corridor similar to the one we were in. A security guard ran past the camera, his face contorted in fear. He kept looking back over his shoulder at something pursuing him, something the camera never quite caught. Just before the video cut out, the guard's shadow on the wall began to change shape, stretching and twisting in ways that defied anatomy. Izzy's medical training kicked in as she studied the footage. "That's not possible. Human bodies don't move like that. The skeletal structure wouldn't allow it." "I've got the door," Ghost announced, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The blast door groaned open with a sound like distant thunder. Beyond it lay the main research level. Unlike the sterile corridors above, this area showed signs of rapid evacuation. Papers littered the floor, chairs lay overturned, and worst of all, we found the first signs of violence. Long, dark stains marked the walls, and some of the stains seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. "What do you make of this?" Mace asked, kneeling to examine a strange impression in the metal floor. It looked like someone had taken a handful of softened clay and twisted it, except this was solid steel. Before anyone could answer, a sound echoed through the facility, not an alarm or a voice, but something between the two, a keening wail that made my teeth vibrate and sent shivers down my spine. It rose in pitch until it became almost unbearable, then cut off abruptly. "Graves," I called over the radio. "We're getting some strange phenomena down here. What exactly was Project Citadel researching?" Static answered me for several long seconds before his voice came through, distorted and breaking up. "Captain, need to access lower levels, containment protocols, find Dr. Alvarez." The radio died completely after that. Ghost tried to re-establish communication, but got nothing but white noise that seemed to form words just below the threshold of understanding. We found the main laboratory in chaos. Equipment worth millions lay shattered on the floor. Computer banks had been ripped from the walls, their innards spilling out like mechanical entrails. In the center of the room stood a massive containment chamber, its thick glass walls cracked, but not broken. Inside the chamber, we saw our first real evidence of what we were dealing with. The glass was covered in a thick, dark fluid that moved on its own, forming patterns that hurt to look at. But it was what lay beneath the fluid that turned my blood to ice. A body lay curled in a fetal position, but it wasn't human anymore. The limbs had elongated, joints bending in new directions. The skin had transformed into something that looked like burnished metal in some places and raw meat in others. The head was the worst part. It had split open like a flower, revealing rows of organs that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Izzy's medical scanner went crazy when she pointed it at the thing. "These readings, they suggest this transformation happened while the subject was still alive. They felt everything." "Over here," Jenna called from a computer terminal that still functioned. I found Dr. Alvarez's personal logs. The last entry was from yesterday morning. The screen flickered as she played the video. A middle-aged woman appeared, her face haggard from lack of sleep. "This is Dr. Elena Alvarez, lead researcher for Project Citadel. The containment field is failing. The entities we discovered, they're not just specimens, they're seeds. They've been waiting down here for millions of years, waiting to be found, and now they're awakening. If anyone finds this, do not attempt to terminate the subjects. They adapt, they learn, they..." The video cut off as the lights in the lab flickered. When the lights came back up, we all saw it. The containment chamber was empty. The dark fluid had eaten through the glass, leaving a hole just large enough for something to squeeze through. And on the floor, leading away from the chamber toward the deeper levels of the facility, we saw fresh tracks that seemed to shift and change as we watched them. Something moved in the darkness beyond the laboratory doors. Something big, and it was coming closer. No one needed my order to take defensive positions. Years of training kicked in as we formed a circle, weapons ready, backs to each other. The sound of movement grew louder, a wet sliding noise mixed with the click of claws on metal. The darkness beyond the laboratory seemed to deepen, as if something was consuming the light itself. "Movement, 2 o'clock, Jenna whispered, her rifle trained on the doorway. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, flowing like liquid mercury but moving with horrible purpose. As it entered the light, I heard Izzy's sharp intake of breath. The thing before us had once been human. Traces of a security uniform still clung to its twisted frame, and a name badge reading Phillips hung from what might have been a shoulder, but that's where any resemblance to humanity ended. Its flesh rippled and flowed like hot wax, reforming itself with every movement. Multiple limbs sprouted and retracted as it moved, and its face was a constantly shifting mass of sensory organs. "Dear God," Mace breathed, his usual stoicism cracking. "Phillips was on duty last night. I saw his name on the roster." The creature's head snapped toward his voice and it spoke. Not with one voice, but with many, a chorus of stolen voices layered over each other. "Mace, is that you, buddy?" The voice was perfect, friendly, human. "We need help down here. Something's wrong with me." Mace's finger tightened on the trigger, but he hesitated. That moment of hesitation nearly cost him his life. The creature lunged forward with impossible speed, its arm elongating into a razor-sharp appendage aimed at Mace's throat. Jenna's reaction saved him. Her rifle barked 3 times, the round striking the creature center mass. But instead of falling, it simply absorbed the bullets, its flesh rippling as it incorporated the metal into itself. "Fall back," I shouted, firing my own weapon. "Ghost, find us another way out." Ghost's fingers flew over his tablet. "Service tunnel 30 meters back leads to the lower levels." "The lower levels? Are you insane?" Izzy shouted as she fired a burst at another creature emerging from the shadows. "We need to get out of here." "No choice," I responded, backing toward the doorway. "That thing is between us and the exit. We need to find another way up." We retreated down the corridor, taking turns providing covering fire. The creatures pursued us with unhurried confidence, as if they knew we had nowhere to go. More of them emerged from side passages, each one a unique nightmare of twisted flesh and stolen voices. Ghost found the service tunnel entrance, a narrow passage that would force us to go single file. As we piled in, I saw more shapes moving in the darkness behind us. The creatures were herding us deeper into the facility. The service tunnel descended at a steep angle, emergency lights casting everything in a blood-red glow. The walls pressed in close, and the air grew thicker, filled with an organic smell that made my throat close up. Our footsteps echoed oddly, as if the metal beneath our feet was slowly becoming something else. "Hold up," Ghost called from the front. "There's something ahead, some kind of chamber." The tunnel opened into a vast underground space that defied logic. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and the walls were alive. Enormous patterns of bioluminescent growth pulsed across their surface, casting sickly light over what lay below. The floor of the chamber was covered in what looked like nests, organic structures that merged seamlessly with the metal of the facility. Inside them, we could see more transformed humans in various stages of change. Some still looked mostly human, their bodies just beginning to twist and flow. Others were completely transformed, their forms defying description. But it was what stood in the center of the chamber that drew our attention. A massive pillar of writhing flesh and metal rose from the floor to the ceiling, covered in thousands of eyes that all turned to look at us as we entered. At its base lay dozens of empty containment pods, their doors torn open from the inside. "Those aren't just containment pods," Izzy said, her medical scanner whirring. "They're incubators. Whatever was found down here, they were trying to grow more of them." A voice echoed through the chamber, but not from any speaker. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the air, from inside our own heads. "The soldier speaks truth," it said, using a blend of all our voices. "We were seeds, sleeping in the deep places. Your kind found us, tried to understand us, tried to control us. But you cannot control what you cannot comprehend. We are beyond your science, beyond your evolution. We are the next step." The transformed humans began to move toward us, their bodies flowing together into larger forms. The pillar in the center pulsed with increasing intensity, and I felt a pressure building in my mind, like something trying to get in. "Ghost," I said through gritted teeth, "tell me you found something useful in those files you downloaded." He was pale, but his voice was steady. "They had a failsafe, a purge system for the entire facility. But we'd need to reach the control room, and it's 2 levels down." "Of course it is," Mace growled, reloading his weapon. "Because this day wasn't fun enough already." Before anyone could respond, one of the larger creatures surged forward with shocking speed. Mace spun to face it, but he was a fraction too slow. The thing's liquid metal arm wrapped around his leg and yanked him off his feet. "Go," Mace shouted as he was dragged toward the mass of writhing forms. "I'll hold them off." "Oh, we're not leaving you." Jenna started to move toward him, but I grabbed her arm. "Get to the control room," Mace called out, his voice strained as he fired into the creature's mass. "Don't let my ugly ass die for nothing." The last thing we saw as we ran for the far exit was Mace, standing his ground against a wave of horror, his laughter echoing through the chamber as he triggered all his remaining grenades at once. The explosion rocked the facility, and the creatures screamed in 1,000 voices. We ran through corridors that were becoming less metal and more organic with every passing minute, the facility itself transforming around us. Behind us, we could hear the sounds of pursuit, and ahead lay only darkness and the growing certainty that we were running out of time. The sound of Mace's sacrifice echoed through the transforming corridors as we fled deeper into the facility. The walls around us had become a nightmare fusion of metal and organic matter pulsing with an inner light that cast writhing shadows. The air grew thick with spores that glowed faintly, and each breath felt like inhaling liquid fire. "The control room should be through the next section," Ghost said, his voice ragged from running. His tablet screen flickered with interference, the facility schematics distorting as if the very data was being corrupted. "But these readings don't make sense anymore. It's like the whole place is reorganizing itself." A violent tremor shook the facility, nearly knocking us off our feet. When it subsided, Jenna pointed to the ceiling with her rifle. "Look." Above us, the metal support beams were slowly twisting into organic shapes, forming patterns that resembled a grotesque nervous system. Drops of some viscous fluid fell from the transformation points, sizzling where they hit the floor. "This whole place is becoming one of them," Izzy said, her medical scanner giving off warning beeps. "The infection, or whatever it is, it's not just affecting people anymore, it's converting matter itself." Our radios crackled to life, making us all jump. Colonel Graves's voice came through, broken and distorted. "Captain Turner, Project Citadel. Never meant to be found. The entities. They're older than Earth itself. Seed ships preparing colonization." "Colonel, say again." I tried to respond, but only got static. Then, through the white noise, came another voice, one that made my skin crawl. "He can't help you anymore," the voice said, using Colonel Graves's vocal patterns, but wrong, like hearing your own voice played backward. "He's known about us for a very long time, since the first breach, 20 years ago. Would you like to see what happened to him then?" The walls around us rippled, and suddenly we were looking at images playing across their surface, like some organic video screen. We saw a younger Colonel Graves leading a team into this same facility. We saw them find something in the deep dark, something that moved and flowed and changed them. We saw Graves escape, but not before the entities had already begun their work inside him. "Oh God," Jenna whispered. "He's one of them. He's been one of them all along. This mission, we were never meant to investigate. We were meant to be raw material." Before anyone could respond, Ghost let out a choked cry. He was staring at his hands, which had begun to take on a metallic sheen. I think some of the spores got into my cut," he said, his voice trembling. "When I was working on the security panel, I can feel it, changing me. There has to be something in my med kit." Izzy started forward, but Ghost backed away. "Stay back. I can feel it in my mind. They're so old, so patient. They've been waiting millions of years for this moment." His skin began to ripple, and his eyes took on the same bioluminescent glow we'd seen in the transformed humans. "You need to go, now. I'll try to hold on as long as I can. The control room is through there." He pointed to a doorway that was slowly being consumed by organic growth. "Ethan," Jenna started, using his real name for the first time. "Go." Ghost's voice had already begun to change, becoming a chorus of overlapping sounds. "I can feel them coming. They're so excited. They haven't had new patterns to absorb in so long." The last thing we saw as we ran was Ghost fighting his own transformation, his body beginning to flow like liquid metal as he turned to face the creatures pursuing us. His scream of defiance turned into something else, something that made our ears bleed and our minds recoil. The control room, when we finally reached it, was a scene from a biomechanical hell. The computers had been consumed by the organic growth, transformed into twisted hybrids of technology and living tissue. Displays flickered with images that seemed to move in more dimensions than should be possible. There, Izzy pointed to a central console that still looked mostly intact. "That has to be the purge control system." But as we approached it, the air in front of us shimmered and Colonel Graves stepped out of nowhere, except it wasn't really him anymore. His form flowed and shifted, parts of him transparent, showing the writhing mass of transformed organs inside. "Did you really think we wouldn't guard against our own destruction?" he said, his voice resonating with inhuman harmonics. "We've been guiding humanity's development for so long, nudging you toward this moment, and now you're going to help us take the next step." Tentacles of liquid metal shot out from his body, aiming for us. Jenna dove one way, I went another, but Izzy wasn't quite fast enough. One of the tentacles grazed her arm, and immediately a metallic sheen began to spread from the point of contact. No, Izzy screamed, watching the transformation begin. The purge controls, you have to... The rest of her words were lost as her body began to change, but instead of giving in to the horror, she drew her sidearm with her still human hand. For my father, she said, and fired directly into the main power conduits running along the wall. The explosion threw us all backward. Through the flames and smoke, I saw Izzy's transforming body being consumed by the blast, a look of peace on her face in the final moment before the fire took her. The entire facility shuddered, and warning alarms began to blare. The blast damaged the containment systems. Jenna shouted over the noise, "This whole place is going to collapse." The transformed Graves thing roared in fury, its form becoming even more monstrous. "You can't stop evolution. We are the next step. We are the future." As the facility began to tear itself apart around us, I realized with growing horror that we were running out of options, and the entities were still between us and any hope of escape. The facility's death throes shook the entire mountain. Emergency lights pulsed red through the smoke and chaos as Jenna and I faced the monstrosity that had once been Colonel Graves. Behind him, the organic growth consuming the walls began to move with purpose, forming into grotesque shapes that reached for us with liquid metal limbs. "The helicopter," Jenna said, her voice steady despite everything. "If we can reach it." "You'll never make it to the surface," Graves's distorted voice echoed through the chamber. "The changes have already begun. Can't you feel them? In your blood, in your bones, in your minds?" He was right about one thing. I could feel something trying to work its way into my thoughts, like fingers of ice probing at the edges of my consciousness. Each breath brought more of the glowing spores into our lungs, and my skin had begun to tingle with a sensation that felt like electricity and wrongness combined. "We have to move," I said, checking my weapon. "Now." We ran, not toward the main entrance, which we knew would be blocked, but toward the emergency shaft we'd spotted on Ghost's facility schematics. Behind us, the transformed Graves pursued, his body splitting into multiple flowing forms that filled the corridor. "This was always your purpose," his voice surrounded us, coming from the walls themselves. "Humanity was never meant to be the end product. You were the incubators, the raw material we would need when we finally awoke. Your technology, your evolution, all guided by fragments of our consciousness embedded in your DNA, waiting for this moment." A tentacle of liquid metal shot past my head, missing by inches and embedding itself in the wall. Where it struck, the metal immediately began to transform, spreading outward in a web of organic corruption. We reached the emergency shaft, a vertical tunnel stretching up toward the surface. The elevator was gone, destroyed in the chaos, but the maintenance ladder remained. As we began to climb, I looked down and immediately wished I hadn't. The creatures were flowing up the walls like quicksilver, merging and separating in impossible ways. "They're hurting us," Jenna said between breaths as we climbed. "They want us alive, more raw material for their transformation." She was right. The entities could have caught us already if they wanted to, but they were playing with us, letting us tire ourselves out. Above us, fresh air beckoned. Below us, horror pursued. Halfway up the shaft, Jenna suddenly stopped. "Ryan," she said, using my real name, my arm. I looked and felt my heart sink. A metallic sheen had begun to spread across her skin, starting from a small cut she must have received during our escape. The transformation had begun. "Leave me," she said, her voice already taking on the harmonic overtones we'd heard in the other transformed victims. "I'll hold them off. Give you a chance." "No, there has to be." "There isn't time." The metal had reached her shoulder now, and one of her eyes had begun to glow with that terrible bioluminescence. "I can feel them in my head, trying to take control, but I get to choose what my last human act will be." She looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw the same determination I'd seen in her eyes during countless missions. "Get to the chopper, tell the world what happened here, and Ryan, I'm sorry about your family, you deserved better." Before I could stop her, Jenna let go of the ladder, but instead of falling, she twisted in the air, her partially transformed body responding to her last human commands. She drew her last grenade as creatures surged up toward her. "This is for my brother," she said, and pulled the pin. The explosion filled the shaft with fire and shrapnel. I climbed faster than I ever had in my life, driven by the sound of screaming metal and inhuman shrieks below. When I reached the top, I slammed the emergency bulkhead shut, but not before I saw the mass of transformed flesh and metal beginning to recover, reforming itself from the devastation Jenna had wrought. The surface level was almost unrecognizable. The organic growth had spread throughout the facility, turning corridors into pulsing arteries and rooms into biological chambers. But I could see the exit, the early morning light spilling through the doors that now looked more like a mouth than an entrance. I ran for it, my lungs burning from the spore-filled air. Behind me, I could hear the bulkhead being torn apart as the creatures recovered from Jenna's sacrifice. The light grew brighter, and then I was outside, sprinting toward the Black Hawk. The helicopter sat where we'd left it, but the organic corruption had begun to spread across its surface. As I reached the cockpit, I could see tendrils of metallic growth creeping across the windshield. My hands flew across the controls, muscle memory taking over as I started the engine. The rotor began to turn, but something felt wrong. The metal of the helicopter itself was beginning to change, responding to the infection that had spread from the facility. Through the windshield, I saw them emerge. Dozens of transformed humans, led by the thing that had been Colonel Graves. They flowed across the ground like living mercury, their bodies reflecting the morning sun with an oily sheen. And behind them, rising from the mountain itself, something vast was taking shape, as if the entire facility was transforming into a single massive entity. "You can't escape evolution." Graves's voice came through the helicopter's radio, though I hadn't turned it on. "The process has already begun. The spores are spreading on the wind. By the time you reach the nearest city, the change will have taken root. This is how it begins. This is how humanity transcends." The controls grew warm under my hands as the helicopter's metal continued to transform. I had seconds, maybe less, before the aircraft itself became part of their biomechanical nightmare. In that moment, I thought of my wife and daughter, of the empty house I'd left behind. I thought of Mace's sacrifice, of Ghost's transformation, of Izzy's final act of defiance, and of Jenna's last gift of time. I had a choice to make. The kind of choice that defines not just a person, but perhaps the future of humanity itself. The entities were right about one thing: there was no going back, but perhaps there was still a chance to go forward on our own terms. I had less than 30 seconds before the helicopter would become completely corrupted. The transformation was spreading across the control panel like spilled mercury, and I could feel the whole aircraft shuddering as its metal structure began to change. Below, the entities surged forward, their liquid metal forms reflecting the morning sun in ways that hurt my eyes. The massive shape rising from the mountain had almost fully formed now. It looked like a tower of twisted flesh and metal stretching up into the clouds, its surface covered in countless eyes and mouths that all moved independently. At its base, the transformed remnants of Project Citadel pulsed with otherworldly energy. I made my decision. My hands moved across the controls, fighting against their increasing resistance as the metal tried to flow away from my touch. I engaged the weapons system, thankful that Jenna had insisted on a full loadout before the mission. The entities wanted this helicopter. They could have it, along with everything else. "You're right about one thing," I spoke into the radio, knowing they could hear me. "There's no stopping evolution. But you forgot something important about humanity." The thing that had been Graves paused in its advance, multiple faces forming across its surface to stare at me. "And what would that be, Captain Turner?" I smiled as I finished arming every piece of ordnance on the Black Hawk. "We decide our own path." I aimed the helicopter directly at the facility's main entrance, where the largest concentration of fuel tanks and power cells were located. The entities realized what I was doing a moment too late. They surged forward, their forms merging into a tidal wave of living metal. "You'll die too," Graves's voice crackled through the radio. "The spores are already in your system. You're becoming one of us even now." "Maybe," I said, feeling the tingling sensation spreading across my skin, "but I get to choose what my last human act will be." I redlined the engines and locked the controls. The helicopter's metal structure was almost completely transformed now, tendrils of liquid metal reaching for me from every surface. As I reached for the door, I saw my own hand beginning to take on a metallic sheen. The ground rushed up to meet me as I jumped, rolling across the frost-covered earth. Behind me, the Black Hawk, now more alien than machine, slammed into the facility's entrance at full speed. The explosion was like a miniature sun, the heat wave knocking me flat. The entities screamed, a sound that contained the voices of everyone they'd absorbed, including my teammates. The massive tower of flesh and metal began to collapse, its structure destabilized by the chain reaction of explosions rippling through the facility's power grid. I ran. My legs felt strange, the transformation progressing with every step, but I forced them to keep moving. Behind me, the mountain itself seemed to be collapsing inward, taking the facility and its horrors with it. The entities tried to escape, their liquid metal forms flowing across the ground, but the explosions had ignited something in the facility's power core. Blue-white energy coursed across the landscape, causing their biomechanical flesh to break down at the molecular level. The blast wave caught me just as I reached the tree line, throwing me into darkness. I woke up 3 days later in a military hospital. The doctors couldn't explain why I hadn't transformed like the others. Maybe it was the explosion's energy, maybe it was just blind luck. They found traces of the metallic substance in my blood, but it was inert, dead. The official story was that a classified research facility suffered a catastrophic containment breach of an experimental biological agent. The entire area was quarantined, the mountain sealed under tons of concrete and steel. But I know the truth, and I know it isn't over. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see a faint metallic gleam in my eyes. Sometimes, in my dreams, I hear their voices, speaking of patience and evolution and the long game they've been playing since before our species walked upright. And sometimes, I wonder if destroying that facility really stopped them, or if it just delayed the inevitable. Because the thing about seeds is you never really get them all, and the earth is very, very deep. I've written this account because people need to know what happened in Montana. They need to know about the brave men and women who died to give humanity a chance. Mace, with his dark humor and unwavering loyalty. Ghost, whose curiosity and intelligence might have saved us all if things had been different. Izzy, so young and determined to prove herself, making the ultimate sacrifice. And Jenna, my friend and teammate who chose to die human rather than live as something else. But mostly, I write this as a warning, because sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving past dark buildings or walking down empty streets, I see strange reflections in the metal surfaces. Reflections that move when they shouldn't, that show things that aren't there. And I wonder, how many other facilities like Project Citadel are out there? How many other seeds are waiting to sprout? Watch the dark places, watch the deep places, and if you ever see metal start to flow like water, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because evolution is coming, and next time, we might not be able to stop it.